Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the session. Good morning, afternoon, evening, nights, wherever you all may be. This is a topic I'm immensely passionate about, and it has evolved for me over the years from various aspects of my own career, from being a product manager to hiring product managers and leading product teams. And since this is the exec track, this session is really meant to talk about what even is product management in the public sector and what are these roles? Why do we care? And what can we really do to rethink how we build digital services with the product lens inside the public sector? So thank you for joining me now, and I hope we can continue this discussion after this as well in the Q&A session because I'm certain lots of folks have ideas as well. So as Amanda mentioned, I'm Kathy. I've worked across various sectors, and some of what I think really informs this session as well is helping start out and build out the US digital services, specifically the product and engineering parts of USDS, and really seeing how critical product roles, whether they were official titles or unofficial titles, inside a government or public sector setting, and then pairing that with a lot of my own training in product in the private sector. And it really just led to rethinking product as a whole. So let's dive into really what even is product management in the public sector. We'll go over why product management, some product examples, and then we'll wrap up with some product management concepts in the next 35 minutes or so that we have together. And I really want to just do a shout out. We have real product management job titles in the government now across. These are just two of the several that we have now. It's still not enough, but many kudos to the people in the US federal government and folks in the state digital services like the Colorado Digital Service, who really have listed product roles, recognizing how critical these roles are to delivering services that work for all the people who interact with our various governments. And so I want to do a shout out to this because, as many of you know, it is no easy feat to hire into government, and especially no easy feat to hire for roles that traditionally have not been present. So, even the point of how to write job descriptions and justifying why these roles are critical were a really big key factor. So, we'll dive into some of that today as well. But also, beyond job titles, job titles only go along, so far. How do we incorporate a product mindset in the private or in the public sector? How do we incorporate thinking about users and doing user experience research and measuring the right metrics and not just focusing on delivering something, but delivering something that works and thinking about the outcomes that way? And so this talk is really meant to be twofold, to really think about, how do we bring in product people into government, but also outside of that, how do we all have a product mindset, whether we're writing policy or we're actually building digital services, or we're just now in charge of a massive team and we have a budget to allocate, and how do we think about bringing this mindset into the public sector? So why product management though, specifically, right? Failed or poorly designed technologies and services can lead to harm. Many of you know this. Many of you are here because you care about this. And it's especially, we see this in the private sector as well, and that's a different talk, but it's especially important in the public sector, right? People rely on us for critical services, and especially vulnerable groups and those who come to us for help. We can't fail people because our technology services aren't working. And as many of you know, no matter how perfectly we design our policies, sometimes the tech aspect of it can derail how people get healthcare or unemployment or get into our respective countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I really deeply believe that a product mindset or product role has a critical role to play in this. So when I say product, what am I even talking about? What does this role do? Some of the many responsibilities. This is not a comprehensive list. It is a very word heavy list as well to watch remotely on a stream. But I'll go through a few things. It's different than other roles because now you have at least an individual that you've now designated to understand the customer, or the user or the people that you're meant to serve, and not just the people, but the whole ecosystem of the community around them. And you build and iterate, but you want to make sure we release products that address the problem and not just release products that we write about and have a spec list for that don't actually solve the problem. We think about how to bring data in. We think about how to collect the data in a meaningful, also responsible kind of way. We think about product vision and product roadmaps and know what those are. So we don't just look at a Gantt chart that has a schedule of who should ship what by when. That's important as well, and we'll get to that. But we viciously hold on to this product vision of how do we build something that solves this problem, and not just build something for the sake of building something. We have to communicate across all the stakeholders: leadership, presidents, secretaries, chancellors, um, users, people who use our products, engineers, product managers, vendors, and the complicated ecosystem that is the public sector. That might be a little bit different than if you were just to do a startup or run a product team in a private sector company somewhere. We're the heart and minds and voice of the people that we have to serve. We have to work across teams. We have to make really difficult product trade-offs, and how important it is to have that role on our teams when we build services in the public sector. Someone who makes the ultimate decision on the trade-offs, but to also meaningfully make those decisions, we have to understand what the problem is and who we're serving, what all the different constraints are, and why we might not be able to deploy something across some part of government. We have to understand that whole ecosystem. So how do we hire people in who really have a grasp on that? We have to meet end goals. We have to think about resources and time as well. That's a little bit of the project management part of the job. And bring everyone along the journey, right? If we're building services that need to work, how do we bring our engineers and PR team and press team and ethics teams and leadership and government along for the journey so they understand why we're building something? But you're like, well, we have project managers. Kathy, why are you talking to us about product managers? We have people who keep things on track and make sure we deliver and do agile development, et cetera. Well, here is a reductive, simplified view of some of the differences, and there's so many more. There are also lots of overlaps. Oftentimes, a project person helps us deliver to a plan. There is a schedule, maybe there's a fixed price contract, we have to get something out the door, and you're focused on the output of the plan, right? Like, is everyone meeting all these milestones of the plan? And some of the priorities might include managing resources, budget, deliver on time. Those things are all important. We have to manage that too. But in addition, we need someone who thinks about delivering to the vision and not just a plan. You can have a plan to build something that never works, and everyone works on that plan, and then you end up with something that doesn't work. But we have to make sure someone also has a vision and is focused on how to execute that vision within this plan, and focus on the outcomes toward the vision and not just, checkbox. We did some user experience testing and checkbox, we have a new button on the page. And these priorities include meeting the goals of the product, understanding user needs, prioritizing the right metrics, and not just, how many people get to our website. Were they able to do something on our website? Um, and so many other metrics that are meaningful, and really having a role that understands how to do that. This is a framework that's been around for a long time. It came out of the Stanford D School. I have to bring it up because it's the design thinking process, and a lot of product managers also subscribe to the design thinking process. It's not perfect. There are lots of people that have now really interrogated this process and interjected different parts that really bring in equity and design and communities in ways that maybe historically this process has not captured. But at the high level, I think it captures a lot of the points of what product managers think about. We empathize with the people that we're serving, and we go and define the product and the personas and the people and the roles that we have to build for. And then we come up with ideas, and then we prototype, which means it could be something on paper, right? I can draw out what I'm thinking to get a sense for, is this going to work for people? If I'm going to launch a COVID vaccine website and it's going to be mobile first, and this is what it looks like, is that a good idea? Let's try it out. Let's prototype, and we test, and we keep doing it over and over and over again. And this is where I think oftentimes we lack these kinds of roles inside our government and public sector settings. We have folks who can really help us execute on a plan, but how do we fit in this empathize and ideate and prototype and test aspect to make sure we build things that actually work and solve the problem? So how do we bring in those roles? It's not just product managers. We should be hiring user experience researchers, and data analysts and so many others, and great engineers and so many others as well, content strategists and other roles. But product is one that we'll talk about today. There's this great comic that is I actually share it in some of the classes I teach as well. We always get a laugh out of it, and I think it really just gets to the heart of product management, where the first little image you see is how the customer explained it. They want this swing that has 3 levels, it's hanging from a branch, and it's how some user or some person explained to you what they need, right? And then the business consultants next, they have this huge couch, hanging on a string. And the product leader understood it as this, diagram where the two strings are on the both sides, and the analyst designed it one way, and the programmer wrote it where the swing doesn't even swing; it's just sitting on the grass. I'm also a programmer, so I feel like that's an okay kick at programmers. The beta testers got something that looked like a noose. It didn't perform under load testing. It's burning. It's on fire. The customer was billed, and those of you who've dealt with contractors, those of you who are contractors, think about this. The customer was billed as if it was this massive roller coaster. There was no support for it, but finally, what they really wanted was a tire swing on a swing, hanging on a branch. And so, how do we have people in the room that are so focused on the problem and the vision that despite all the noise that's around, right, despite all the things that people are saying, we get to the heart of what people really need, right? Do people really need a nice flashy website that's built for $80 million? Or do they really need to be able to put food on the table and the money each week to do that? Or do they really need to ultimately just be able to get a vaccine? And how do we get there? And there are all these ways to get there, and all these ways we communicate how to get there. And lots of miscommunication happens along the way. So, how do we have a product person in the room, whether or not it's their title, to get us to that tire swing, or that vaccine, or that food on the table, or that housing security, um, and all these other communication vessels and technologies that we build serve that purpose. So that cartoon always sticks with me. So we have this graphic that was put out by Mind the Product, which is one of the largest product conferences and communities in the world. And again, it's meant for the private sector, and it's super oversimplified, but I think it also really helps a lot of folks that I shared this with think about product. It's the role that sits at the center of technology, a business, and the user experience, right? And you can really expand that out to be a lot of different things. Like, what is a tech ecosystem? Who are all the stakeholders inside the user experience? What, like, the business part could be marketing and PR and business and revenue. But the difference really is, what is the business part of the public sector? We're not out to make money. We're out to serve everyone that we have to be in service for. So for us, the business is every single person who ever has to interact with us in our business. And that really makes product management quite different. We're not out there to get the most clicks, and we're not out there to generate the most revenue. We're out there in service. And that means there aren't edge cases of people that we don't have to worry about. And we only just want to get the most power users, right? And so we'll get to that as well. And we have to break through the falsehoods. We hear so many, these are all real things I have heard and other colleagues have heard around the world who have built technology in some sense in the public sector. User experience testing is illegal, which means you can't go out in the world and talk to students, for example, about what it's like to sign up for or what it's like to apply for colleges around the world. But that's not true. We just need people in the room who can really understand how to cut through when someone says user experience testing is illegal, or an executive who said, I'm the user, my child's going to college too. I mean, how often do we hear that, right? We also need people in the room who can really cut through that as well. Or sign these 22 documents, or we can give you access to a server to deploy your code. Or worse, in order to deploy your code, you have to sign this sheet of paper. Or we do user experience testing. We just had them click through the screen to get to the last page and it worked. We're done. We're done with user testing. Or, we just want to migrate from this legacy database to the cloud. How hard can it be? And we don't have time for edge cases right now. All these things are falsehoods. These are things that we need someone inside the public sector to cut through, whether it's with our own team members, whether it's with other folks around government. How do we cut through all these falsehoods so that we can build, because all of these things get in the way of us understanding the problem and figuring out how something, like what some of the needs are, and actually deploying products that work. And we need someone who's hyper focused on the vision of the product and the problem to get us there. So just a few product examples, and then we'll dive into a few product concepts, and then we'll wrap up. Here's something that I have worked on in the past, where in a public sector setting, this was how a healthcare entity entered information. And this story will resonate with some of you who've built stuff in the public, or even really any hospital setting. It was so complicated that it became easier to go ahead and to store information in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or something. Not because people wanted to do that. It's because what's the primary goal here? The primary goal here isn't to be able to enter information into a document. The primary goal is to serve patients. And then the secondary goal is to be able to have enough information and data so that your center knows how many people you serve, because maybe it affects the funding that your healthcare center gets, right? There are all these reasons why you might need to track information, but primarily a healthcare entity exists to be able to help people who need healthcare. And when the product that you create for them to track information about their patients, and let's say it's designed to be used in real time, it's impossible to be used in real time because they're actively working with the patient. Let's say you're also in a really hands-on discipline as well, right? Like physical therapy or something. It becomes really hard. And then your answer to that is, well, it's okay if the user experience is hard. We'll just give people a manual to explain to them how to use this. How many times have we also heard that? So that's not okay, right? How many of us use manuals to use a website? Not very many. And so there was a team that came in and attempted to just understand what the user needs were, go and talk to people who were working with patients. It turns out this was a very hands-on type of like medical discipline. And so it had to be a lot simpler to use. So how do we really think about solving the problem for people, and what does that look like? Because they'll find alternatives, and sometimes those alternatives are not ideal. We don't want patient information floating around in emails or flash drives in people's pockets. Another example, many kudos to the team at the Veterans Affairs in the United States. They wrote there's a link at the bottom for the Medium link. They wrote a bit about this, and they also did a user experience interview that they recorded. For a while, in order to sign up for healthcare, you had to have Internet Explorer or Adobe 8 or 9, that combination, in order to even get to this PDF where you can sign up for healthcare. There are so many different issues we can dissect there, right? Like, how would any person know that they are supposed to have those two things? They might not even have those two things. And why do we make it so hard for someone who has served in our military to be able to get healthcare in the first place? And so what this team did was went and just really understood the user experience, what was preventing people from being able to sign up. And they built a form instead and kept the back end the same, that allowed people to now sign up for healthcare. And that included a series of user experience research, interviews, product people who thought about the end-to-end experience. So it wasn't just the experience of, did we get a PDF up online? It was a full end-to-end experience of the moment you determine you need healthcare, do you get it at the end? All the in-between pieces we have to figure out, but the goal isn't a pretty website. The goal isn't a website that had buttons that you can click through. The goal is to get healthcare, and you need someone in the room to really understand that. And oftentimes a product person serves that purpose. And that led to a series of other improvements on the VA.gov website as well. So thank you, VA team. And we now know, right, there's many cases also of the COVID vaccinations, of different countries scrambling to develop COVID vaccine websites and it started with oftentimes the website to sign up for vaccinations. In some cases, the first option was to be web or mobile first and online. And that seemed like it would make sense, I think, in some cases, but also for anyone who was out in the field, what it looked like was the initial demographic that was eligible for vaccines in many of our countries also weren't the tech savvy as people as well. And so that became a problem. So how do we avoid scenarios where we build these solutions that seemingly are ideal or maybe are ideal for some populations, but the initial population that we have to target just won't be able to use it? And what does that look like? Shifting a little bit from building stuff inside government now to government buying services, because again, this is all relevant. How do we have people in the room where most of our government services we buy, right? A lot of this also relies on us having vendors that might have product mindsets as well. But when we're a government entity and we buy services, let's say predictive policing software, are we making sure we solve the problem that we're really intending to solve for, or are we exacerbating the problem? There are now cases that we know of where we've bought software as a government to think about predictive policing, and we end up over policing certain areas of the world because that's the way the software worked. So, did that person who either did the procurement or who built the technology, or some combination, was there a person who understood the end to end experience of not just the people buying the technology, which is maybe some precinct somewhere of the police department, but also understood what the end outcome of this product was on the communities that they were going to be deployed on. So there's so many scenarios like that, right, where we as a government we buy technologies and we deploy them to these communities, and they may or may not actually solve the problems. And in some cases, they make the problems even worse. And we've seen this with predictive policing. Virginia Eubanks has written this in her Automating Inequality book with signing up for healthcare services with various different states and cities around the country. So, who really understands the experience of the community to make sure we don't fall into some of these issues? And then shifting a little bit now more too from like the government contracting to just where are as a public sector or government, what's our responsibility in understanding products, how they're used, the communities they serve, and then where regulation plays into this. And this is less of the traditional part of product management, but I do think it's where product in the public sector differs than product in the private sector, where we have a lot of influence, right? Either on policy or how what's regulated or what products are really shipped out in the world. In this case, we have cases where the NASA suits were designed for half the population, and it became an issue at some point. We have cases where, until very recently, the test dummies in cars were tested on an average, quote, average male body of the 50th percentile in the United States. And so not only was that made it so that half the population in the US perhaps weren't in that category, but also if you weren't that average, what was deemed average male body in the US. And that's where government has a role in thinking through that as well. And how do we pair that understanding of how the private sector builds products with some kind of policy just to ensure the safety of all the people that we serve as well. And so there's different ways I think a product mindset can be really applied to the way we build services directly in government, the way we work with contractors and vendors, or even the way we think about building policies around the products that are built outside of a direct government setting. And this is a closer view of the car crash test case. And again, it was still very recently that car companies, again, subject to regulation to some degree, brought in different types of bodies for testing inside a car. And what is our role as government to understand what is the end-to-end use case of all of that and do something meaningful with that. So I'll end with one more case, and we'll go into a few more product concepts. This is a shout out to Tracy Walker, who is the head of procurement at the U.S. Digital Service, and wrote this great piece about redefining good enough for government and why she had joined the U.S. Digital Service. And she had this example about buying buses. And again, this is in the procurement space, but draws upon so many concepts of understanding communities and people and the problem and not just going straight to the solution. So let's say you decide that you must have buses to transport 2,000 people. You're like, we're going to buy buses. The equivalent is, we're going to build a website, or we're going to migrate to the cloud, or these like very definitive solutions of what we're going to do, and start with solutions first. And she goes through these examples, like all these contractors are coming back with quotes that were too high. And finally, they did a discussion. Well, what problem are we trying to solve for? Like, why do we want to buy these buses? Again, you can expand that to, well, why do you want to build this website? Turns out they had to think of a way to transport people from one location to another for a specific event. And once they talked about the problem, it was, oh, we don't necessarily need to buy buses. What if we just had a shuttle that transported people? So what is that for different things? Like we see these versions of this in policymaking and procurement and building digital service in the public sector, going back to what the problem is, and then now opening up this perspective of all the things and solutions we can have versus coming to the table with, we want X, Y, Z, which is what we so often do. And that's what product managers are often trained to do. We hold so tightly to the vision and the product and not get stuck in this world of, we have to build this thing on this timeline, on this schedule, and ship it. We need people with the product mindset to be like, you know what, maybe why do you want buses? And you're like, oh, it's because you want to transport people. So let's go back and build something else. Why do you want this app? Why do you want this, portal? And it's like, oh, maybe just a shared spreadsheet might work for this particular scenario. Right. So how do we make sure we bring people like that in? So the product concepts, there's so many, but I'll dive into a few. So I think this is critical for both understanding why this role is so critical in the public sector, but also as you write your job description for this role, these are some of the skills that these people bring to the table. And as we all know, hiring in government requires writing job descriptions and then getting that approved, and that is not always the easiest concept. So I'll go through in the last 10 minutes or so these 6 different concepts. Discovery sprints, measuring the right metrics, designing user experience, working across disciplines and fields, policy-driven development, and then understanding society, communities, and inequality. Again, this is not comprehensive. So we'll start off with discovery sprints. I think this is probably one of the key parts of having really good product thinking and product mindset and product practices in a government setting. Whether or not you're able to actually hire product managers in, make sure there are people around who understand discovery sprints. And what does that mean? It means if a secretary or a president or a chancellor or a leader comes to you and is like, you must build a website that is green and has 10 pages and will solve this problem of food insecurity. You're like, okay, hold on, can you just give me a week? And I'm gonna go with my team and we're gonna do discovery sprint and we're gonna get to the ground truth. We're gonna figure out who all the stakeholders are, not just the people we're targeting, but all the people in this whole ecosystem that we have to talk to and understand. Figure out who owns all the pieces of the is it even feasible to do? We might want to build a small prototype to see if this is what they actually are asking for. Again, going back to that cartoon, right? Maybe they really wanted a tire swing, but they're asking for this weird contraption. And you're like, is this it? Identify the challenges, get to know the organization, connect across teams, across government. Building government can be complicated. So how do we connect with all the people we have to, right? A healthcare website or a vaccine website requires coordination across multiple government entities. And then lay out a clear process. So having someone in the room that understands how to do sprints is really, really critical. One of the major skills of a product person. Measuring the right metric. This is so important. It is not just how many people visited our site. These are called vanity metrics, or, at what time did people visit? What are we measuring for? Are we serving the people? Are people getting the services they need? How do we measure the right metrics and have people in the room who understand how to do that and push back every time someone measures a vanity metric? A good metric helps shape the direction of the product. It drives change. If it comes back, that particular metric is doing something that is strange or not what we intended, and gets to the heart of, are we solving this problem? Are we getting people these services? If you're building, bike share system in your local city? Are people able to get from A to B? And it's helpful to have metrics like, can someone check out or check in the bike, right? But at the end of the day, can they get from one point to another? Because if all your successes with, a ton of people were able to check out our bikes, if they were able to ride it anywhere and check it back in, are you successful? How do you make sure you measure all the right metrics? And this is so, so important. Having someone who really owns working across disciplines and fields, especially in a public sector setting. So it's not only oftentimes in the product management, if you go to any conferences, as PMs, we work across different stakeholders in marketing and PR and engineering and data science, et cetera. But in the public sector, we also have figuring out which agencies have to work together and which regulating body, and if you're in the US, like how do you bring in Congress if you have to for budget, and all these complicated aspects. And not just that, right? Like if we're working on a housing or vaccine or something that is deeply society and human and community, we need to go out into the community and bring in those disciplines too. We can't just ignore what people out in the world in our communities really need and decide sitting in our cushy offices what we think they need. We can You can, but it wouldn't. Oftentimes, will result in services that don't really understand the population they're trying to serve. And design and user experience. This is a whole discipline in itself, and we need more. We actually have customer experience roles now as well. But how do we have people in the room who also either understand how to do this or have the foresight to bring in design and user experience experts to really think through how do we build systems that are easy to use, that solve the problem, that get to the core needs of what people actually need. And so either having the know-how to do some of this or knowing to bring in these types of experts into the room and knowing how to even ask the right question on, did you do this kind of user experience research? Or when you thought about design, did you think about accessibility and what does that look like? And so many questions that we have to know to answer that often sometimes it'll help to have someone who know those as well. A thing that I think is also very unique to the public sector is something that some of us have deemed policy driven development, which is instead of being driven by a market or being driven by what a ton of people want, sometimes there are just policies that come out that now require a technology component. So now we find ourselves at the whim of some policy, whether it's a healthcare policy or a new policy for holding hospitals accountable or a new policy for making sure X number of people sign up for food services in a particular region. There are these policies that now drive the technology being built. And then that's where it gets complicated because there's the policy prescribes what you're supposed to build. So how do you do the discovery sprints, planning and the metrics and user experience research to make sure what's built actually solves the problem and not just fits the need of a policy that someone made, whether or not they thought about the communities that they're trying to serve for. And two more before we wrap up. Understand society, communities, and inequality. This I actually think our governments can do a lot better on as well, but do much better than the private sector on. There are so many public servants that I've worked with over time who deeply understand the needs of the people that they're trying to serve for. So whether it's people who work for a housing authority and deeply understand housing insecurity, or people who work for Veterans Affairs or the military who deeply understand what each of those groups need. And that's so critical also to bring into the technology development process. Sometimes they're just like two separate entities. You have the people who over here who understand what people need, and then you have the people over here who are making policy and building tech products. And how do we have someone in the room to bring those two things together? Whether they're officially a product person, a product manager, or maybe your leader now just understands the product mindset and thinking, how do you pair that together? So for all of you, how will we bring product management and or product thinking throughout the entirety of all the public sectors that we are in? Not just having job descriptions for these roles, but bring this mindset that we can't just build things without thinking about the actual problem we're solving for and the people for whom we're solving them for. And how do we really bring that understanding and mindset into the public sector? So let's chat more in the Q&A session afterwards. I'm excited to hear from everyone else. And thanks for joining this session to think about ways to empower product thinking and product management in the public sector to build services that work for people.